This morning I want to stay in 2 Samuel. I appreciate the lessons in which Ray was able to continue on with a series of thought from week to week as we've been dealing with Hebrew history. In particular, last week he focused on the idea of Saul, David, and Solomon. While all having desirable traits, each one of them fell short and they were not perfect. David in particular, I want to look at within 2 Samuel this morning, possibly this evening. We'll see how far we get with time as far as the events, because I actually want to cover from the beginning, the chapter, all the way to the last chapter, noticing different things about David and his heart. If you remember back in 1 Samuel chapter 13, going verse 14, it is after Saul had taken upon himself to offer a sacrifice. He took upon himself a right that was not his. He had seen the people were in a position that it was ready for time of attack, but Samuel was not there, so Saul decided he would offer the sacrifice. And so in chapter 13 and verse 14 of 1 Samuel, what actually happens is that Saul is being told that his kingdom would not endure. Instead it says, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought him a man," notice this phrase, "after his own heart. The Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee." It's off that principle this morning I want for us to examine David's life. Many people and commentators, if you go to 2 Samuel, will talk about the distinction and the great pains the last part of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel take in order to show the kind of man that David was. And I believe that to be the case through inspiration, that this is what the lessons are to come to us from. Certainly he's not perfect, but what about his heart? That was the distinguishing feature that would make him to be appointed by God. Well, if his heart was important to God back then regarding David, there's nothing that changes today about our hearts. Consider for a moment with me Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23 is where I believe I want to go to. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. It is here we are actually told by the Proverbs writer that we are to keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Another way of thinking about keep the heart, a translation of that word keep, is actually to translate the word as guard. That you guard your heart. And we think about a lot of things that we may guard, and we think about that and we think protect, because we want the heart to be valued. Brother Joe, in leading our minds for certainly the Lord's Supper, and then also the contribution that followed, he talked about the idea in the passage that for where your treasure is, there your heart may be also. If we go to the greatest command, we're being told that we're to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. And so once again, it's not just the idea of the service to God that he's concerned about. He's concerned about our heart. Luke chapter 6 and verse 45. It's here that we're actually told recorded by Luke, the idea of a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. So we just stop right there for a moment and consider the slide that is before you. It's the idea, if you want to do good, you want to bring forth good, we've got to get the heart good. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. So if we want good actions, we want sincerity, we want good results in our life, we've got to deal with the heart. See, when the heart's not right, it's disappointing to God. It's actually not what we're working on. In fact, I believe in Christianity today, in many situations, we have done an injustice to those that are sitting in the pews. And I want you to listen close to what I'm about to say, because I don't want you to mistake what I'm going to say. But when we put such an emphasis upon perfect attendance, daily Bible reading, wearing certain clothing, doing certain things, and our emphasis is placed upon there and not the heart, then all we've done is produced an individual that only knows works. Now, works are important. Now, I told you need to listen close. Works are a part. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says, we are his workmanship, that we've been created for good works that he has ordained before the foundation of the world. James would actually tell us that faith without works is dead, being alone. But just imagine right now, I used to live in southern Illinois, and we had a town square. Up there, every town had either a circle or a square. And in that town square, you had shops that would be all around the center, which was the courthouse, and the shops would be around it, and you would have windows. And in those windows of those shops, they would actually put displays of what their goods were. So if you went to a boot shop, they would have boots sitting in the windows. Just imagine a baker. If you walk past that shop and right there in the window, you find and you pick whatever kind of cake you want to. But just imagine a beautiful cake that is there, that the frosting is just perfect. It has been prepared, it's there, it's just absolutely beautiful. And not only is the frosting there, but let's just use red velvet cake, shall we? And you can imagine that white frosting that's there, but then you can think of all the nuts that they have garnished that frosting with. And it's sitting there, and some of these bakers get really fancy, and they might even have larger nuts around and then little sprinkles of crushed nuts, and it's there, and it's sitting in that window, and it just makes you, oh man, I want that cake. And so you go into the baker's shop, and you look at that, and you tell the baker, I want that one in the window. And he says, well, you might not want, no, I want that one in the window. Okay, I'll sell it to you. And so you get it, and you get it home, and the outside looks magnificent, and you just can't wait. And you go to cut into that cake only to find out all that icing was sitting upon cardboard circles. How disappointing would that be? That's what we produce when all we do is have works without our heart being there. Scriptures tell us, many were saying to me that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Have we not done many good works, wonderful works? And it says Jesus is going to say, depart from ye, ye workers of iniquity. There's many people out there that are doing good things, brethren. You look over in the Panama City area, devastation is there. And certainly the Lord's church and your generosity has not gone unnoticed in the efforts of the collection that you have done to help those brethren that are over in that area. And there's feeding of hungry that's taking place. There is servitude that's taking place in cutting tree limbs and trying to repair houses. There are many wonderful works being done by the Lord's church. But those same type of works are being done by organizations that even deny the existence of God. So the work itself is not what God desires, even though He does want that. He wants the heart. We think about pure religion undefiled before God and the Father is this, that we are to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. Why is that pure religion? What makes God choose that there to tell us of what pure religion is? Well, it's easy to find people that will go to the rich to try and help the rich, isn't it? Because of what's in it for them. But He takes two categories of people that there is of no profit to you as an individual for helping. You're not doing it in return. The fatherless, they have nothing. They're without hope in that situation, because they're not able to provide. Now, if you want to get technical, you can say, well, they could love you in return. I get that. But the only thing it's going to do is if you start trying to take care of the fatherless, is it's going to cost you. The widows, for instance, in that situation, and I'm not trying to diminish from widows, I don't think we understand what being a widow was like in the New Testament times compared to today. This is a time in which you could not own property. This is a time in which you could not normally find work of anything that would be something you would want to be doing. Because you had no one to care for you. You had no children to take care of you. You had no husband to take care of you. Going and finding another husband most likely would not be the case, because they were desiring somebody that had not been married. So you were without hope. Naomi and Ruth would be prime examples of that. And certainly is demonstrated by Boaz and the love that he would have towards Ruth despite the circumstances. So why is it pure religion to to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, because it's an action that's brought forth from the heart of loving somebody else. I'm going to approach today's lesson just a little bit different. I want to give you all the points up front. I want you to see what David's heart is, what kind of heart he had, and then for most likely into this evening, we're going to notice these attributes of David's heart demonstrated through 2 Samuel. If you want to write these down, you're welcome to. David's heart was one that was first loving. Secondly, it was one that was forgiving. 3, it was one that was trusting in God. It was one that was seeking righteousness. And it was one that showed honor. We're going to start in 2 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to go to verse 17. This reveals for us a little bit about David's heart, because it's in 2 Samuel 1 verse 17. It says, "And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son." If you go on down here, I actually talk about them in verse 23. "Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your head. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in the high places." We could read more, but I'll leave that to your personal study. But this tells us something about David here. Because if you go back to 1 Samuel, we already noticed this. Saul wanted to kill David. Not because David was unrighteous, not because David sought to hurt Saul, but because Saul was jealous. Here they were singing their songs about how many David killed, which was greater than the ones that Saul killed. And so at one point it describes Saul as taking a javelin and thrusting it, throwing it across the room twice to try and to kill David. Pursuing David over and over and over, to the point that David and his men were described as being at the point of death from malnourishment and weakness. David in 1 Samuel would often say, at least 3 different occasions, would actually say that he would die by the hands of Saul. Now we've already noticed in another lesson the idea of David not taking into his hands to kill Saul, so we're going to leave that alone. But I want you to sit right here and just think for a moment. Here is the news of Saul and Jonathan. They have died in battle. God has delivered him, and so now it would be the time for a party. God's will has been done. Saul, he got what he was deserving, didn't he? He got his just deserts. No, David was the type of man that could still feel sorrow, that could have compassion and love upon this individual, that could have forgiveness. Scriptures in the New Testament tell us to weep with them that weep, rejoice with them that rejoice. I've told you many times, we'll continue to tell you many times, sometimes we struggle with that. Perhaps it's one of the hardest passages. We get it kind of flipped around. We rejoice about those that are weeping, and we weep when others rejoice. And some people would say, well, how could that be? Well, we can sit back and say, well, they got what was coming. They got it. Heard a preacher some time back, and certainly I don't want to appear to be unpatriotic. I appreciate the United States, and I appreciate our military, support them. Thank you to everyone that either currently serves in our military or has served in our military. I'm appreciative of you. But you know, when we see bombs falling from the sky, and we know that death is doomed for those that are the result of those bombs exploding, while we can know that that is a righteous act and that is okay, approved of God, Romans 13 is where I'd say there, shouldn't our hearts still be for those that are lost? God's desire is for every man to be saved. God has sacrificed Jesus for every man on the face of this earth. It doesn't bring him joyfulness whenever he sees someone lost because they have denied Jesus. It doesn't mean that he'll save them, but there's still sorrow. that he experiences. It tells us in the New Testament we're to love our enemies. See, this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty of stuff. This is the application of stuff that sometimes we don't want to talk about. But Saul was certainly an enemy. Though David would declare him that he was the anointed of God, but they were enemies because Saul made them enemies. Not because David desired it, not that he wanted it, but Saul in his behavior necessitated it. But it doesn't mean that there has to be rejoicing in his death. What we see is lamenting. We see the lamentation that would be made. It demonstrates the loving, the forgiving, the honorableness of David. I want to go forward into chapter 3. I can't go at length on any of all this, but we come across Abner. Abner, just to refresh our minds, is Saul's uncle, the son of Ner, and he was actually the commander of Saul's army if you go back to 1 Samuel. It would be after the destruction of Goliath by David that you would actually see Abner come to light as being the leader of the army. But what happened after Saul's death was a power play, so to speak. That typically happens when you have a leader die. You have different ones that think they'd be right to that. Now we're going to notice a little later regarding the man Ishbosheth, and he was a descendant of Saul that would say that he has a right to the throne. But it's actually Abner that would be doing the fighting against Joab, the leader of David's army, and they would be in conflict with one another. He gets to a point that he's about to die in battle, and he actually is able to escape, and I'm going to paraphrase all this, encourage you to read it. But Abner ends up desiring to make peace with David. The man that was leading the revolt that sought to destroy David and deny him the kingship that God said, decides, hey, I'm going to go ahead and make peace with him. Now, if you look to the history, you could see where he was on the losing side. It only made sense. But he got to a point that the fight just wasn't in him any longer. There's a problem that he has, though, in that if you go back, he actually had killed Asahel, which was the brother to Joab, who was the leader of David's army. Joab was out fighting, and so we have word actually come to David from, let me get all my names right, Abner, that they want to make peace. And so the arrangement is made for actually the first wife of David, daughter of Saul, to come, and as long as she would come and bring her, there'd be peace between them. And Abner delivers on his part, and he actually brings with him peace from these tribes that were following him. And so we see a point that things are going to be great. Now, I can't help but think about the forgiveness here. Because if I had the leader, and I've told you before, I don't stand before you the perfect example. There's a reason I'm not God. We all have our struggles. But you have David here, Abner coming to him, and this is a guy that was helping to lead the revolt underneath Saul's son. I don't think I'd be very trusting of him. I also don't think I'd be very forgiving of him either. But David says, come on, that'll be fine. It'll work out. Joab comes back, he finds out what's taking place, and so he actually sends for Abner to come, and what Joab does is he thrusts him through, actually in the same place in which Abner had killed his brother. And so we come to chapter 3, and we want to go to verse 31. David said to Joab and to all the people that were with him, rend your clothes, and gird you with sackcloth, and mourn before Abner. King David himself followed the bier. And look at verse 33. And the king lamented over Abner and said, died Abner as a fool dieth? Jump down to verse 38. The words of David would actually say, And the king said unto his servants, Know ye not that there is a prince and a great man fallen this day in Israel? Now that's something. At the death of Abner, the one that was leading the army that was trying to fight for the son of Saul to take the kingship from David, at this point of death, he would describe him as a prince and great man. You know, I know brethren that can't get this kind of hard in them. I've known preachers that can't get this hard in them. Because there's some preacher that did something to them years before, and they've forgiven one another, but man, they can't even be in the same room with each other. I know congregations that act that way. That here's a congregation in one place, another congregation in this place, and we haven't had anything to do with each other for ages. We can't even tell you what it's about, but we don't get along with one another. But here is David, man after God's own heart. And he can not only forgive Abner, but at his death he even makes all of Israel mourn. And he even goes to the point of praising him before them. That's the spirit of love and forgiveness. That's the spirit of honor. That's the heart we're supposed to have. Let's notice one more this morning. We'll pick up with the rest tonight. Chapter 4. You have two individuals, Benal and Rechab. Now they're significant because I told you a moment ago, Ishbosheth was the son of Saul that was trying to lead the revolt for which Abner was fighting. Now here's a case, these two brothers decide they're going to take it upon themselves to go and kill Saul's son. And so it's described in chapter 4, down around verse 6, that they go into the tent, they go where he's sleeping, and they kill him. They cut his head off, they decide to bring it to David. I want you to notice verse 11 of chapter 4. Let's go back to verse 10, I'm sorry. Chapter 4 and verse 10. When one told me, saying, Behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings. Now he's referring back here, David is, to how he received the news of Saul's death. So he's saying, if you thought I was going to rejoice because of Saul's death, but I didn't, what are you thinking? Verse 11, how much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed? Shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hand and take you away from the earth? It's because peace had already been sought. Remember I told you that his first wife had been desired. He says, send her to me. He makes sure she goes. Verse 12, David commanded his young men, and they slew them, and cut off their hands, their feet, hanged them over the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. Why would he do this? What of the heart of David would make him to the point that you have these individuals go against Ishbosheth on his behalf, but he wasn't happy? Because while he was yet a man of war and had blood upon his hands, he was a man that loved righteousness and others, that had a heart of forgiveness more than a heart of vengeance. Tonight we're going to notice more. We'll get through the rest of it rather quickly, I believe. But what we're going to see from David is that while he's not a perfect individual, he was a man that took care of his heart. Going back to Proverbs, guard your heart. That's what God wants. You know, we think about numbers. We put numbers on this board. And certainly we like to see the numbers go up, don't we? Don't feel good when we see the number over 100. And we see the contribution going forth. I'm not saying that those numbers aren't good. But that's not what it's about. What it's about is the heart that we have. Now here's the trick. If our heart's right, those numbers are going to work out. We need to stop working on numbers. We need to start working on the hearts. Because when your heart's right with God, then you're going to want to be pleasing to Him. When your heart's right, then you're going to want to come and worship Him. When your heart's right, you're going to want to be able to give to Him sacrificially when we have that opportunity to give back on the first day of the week. That's when our heart's right. So if a preacher decided out, and our eldership decided to set out on increasing the contribution, let's say, where do they need to start? They need to start on the heart. They say, well, we need to work on the idea of our attendance and get our attendance up. Where do we need to start? We need to start on the heart. Or evangelism. We need to be more evangelistic. We need to fix that. Where do we start? The heart. Because when we guard our hearts, when we set our hearts right, everything else will fall into place. David faced many battles, many obstacles, so much to have to overcome. It was not a life of ease. If you think David had an easy life, you need to go back and read 1 and 2 Samuel. It was a difficult life. But I'm going to jump ahead to tonight to when you go to about 23rd chapter. You read a psalm in which David would write, and he talks about how the Lord is his rock, how great the Lord is, and everything that God has done to deliver him and to take care of him. Even to the point, as we're noticed tonight, that whenever he was denied building the temple, he decided, who am I to question you? Because David's heart was with God. We're going to sing the song of invitation. I want to encourage you to do just a couple things. One is just looking, where's your heart? Where's your heart this morning? Is it with God? And don't just answer yes. Don't just say, oh yeah, my heart's with God. Ask yourself, is your heart with God, or is your heart with Satan, the world? Is it with work? Where is your heart? And if you're not a child of God, having come in faith, repenting of sins, confessing Christ, and being baptized, then your heart hasn't been with Him. And you need to come taking those steps in order to give Him your heart this morning. If you're an erring child of God and that you've allowed your heart to wander, that it ain't been right, then we need you to come and we'll pray with you for the forgiveness that God wants to give you. Final conclusion I'm going to throw in here is that David's heart was one that was loving, seeking righteousness, one that was forgiving. You're going to notice when he says it's a man after God's own heart, that's God's heart. And God wants to bless you. God wants to love you. He wants to forgive you. He wants to take care of you. This morning, as together, we stand and sing.